The dusty streets of the frontier town echoed with the sound of auctioneers, merchants, and desperate voices. In the middle of it all stood a poor widow, her arms wrapped protectively around a fragile little boy. She was trembling, her face pale from hunger and fear. The town's sheriff had declared that her debts were too great, and her son could be taken as payment. The widow fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Please, don't take my child away," she begged, clutching him tighter. The townsfolk watched silently, some pitying, others indifferent. Life in the West was harsh, and no one wanted to involve themselves in another's troubles. The boy, too young to understand, pressed his face into his mother's dress, whimpering. The widow lifted her eyes, searching the crowd for kindness. But all she saw were turned backs and hard stares. Her heart pounded with terror, knowing that in a matter of minutes, she might lose the only family she had left. Just when all hope seemed lost, a shadow moved at the edge of the crowd. A tall, broad-shouldered rancher stood quietly, his hat pulled low, his eyes fixed on the scene. He hadn't spoken a word, but something in the way he watched suggested he wasn't going to let this end the way everyone expected. The sheriff barked orders, demanding the boy be taken. The widow screamed and held on with all her strength. Two men stepped forward to pry the child from her arms, but before they could, heavy boots crunched against the dirt. The crowd parted as the silent rancher approached. His presence alone carried weight, he didn't need to speak. Dust clung to his coat, and his weathered face spoke of a man who had seen both hardship and loss. He paused in front of the widow and the struggling men, then reached into his worn leather coat. Without a word, he tossed a small pouch onto the sheriff's desk. It landed with a clink, the unmistakable sound of coins. The sheriff blinked in surprise, narrowing his eyes. "What's this supposed to mean?" he asked. The rancher finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "It means the boy stays with his mother." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The sheriff frowned, tempted to argue, but when he met the rancher's steely gaze, he faltered. No one wanted to cross a man like that, someone who didn't speak much, but when he did, every word was iron. The widow looked up at him in shock, tears still glistening in her eyes. For the first time in weeks, hope lit her face. She whispered, "Why would you do this for us?" But the rancher only tipped his hat slightly, saying nothing more. Word of the rancher's bold act spread quickly through the town. Some folks admired him, whispering about his quiet strength and hidden kindness. Others shook their heads, calling him a fool for wasting good money on a woman and child who could give him nothing in return. The widow, still trembling from the ordeal, followed the rancher out of town, her son clutching her hand. She tried to speak, but the weight of gratitude choked her words. At last, she managed to whisper, "You saved us. I don't know how to thank you." The rancher walked with a slow, steady gait, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Don't thank me," he said at last. "Just keep your boy close." His voice carried a sadness that hinted at old wounds, losses he had buried deep. At the general store, people stared as he bought supplies for the widow, flour, beans, a little sugar for the boy. The storekeeper raised an eyebrow, surprised to see the rancher spending more on others than he ever did on himself. By evening, the widow found herself standing outside a modest ranch house, surrounded by open fields and a quiet calm she hadn't felt in years. The rancher had given them not just protection, but a chance to breathe again. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his silence than met the eye. Life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. The widow worked hard, cooking meals, mending clothes, and tending the small garden. Her son followed the rancher around like a shadow, watching him mend fences, care for horses, and ride across the fields. Slowly, the silence that had once seemed intimidating began to feel safe. But the widow couldn't ignore the questions in her heart. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, she found the courage to ask, "Why did you help us that day? You barely knew us." The rancher paused, leaning against the fence. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "Once," he said slowly, "I had a family. A wife. A little girl." His voice cracked slightly, though he tried to hide it. "Lost them in a fire years ago. Couldn't save them." The widow's heart ached as she listened. Suddenly, everything made sense, the sadness in his eyes, the way he looked at her son, the reason he stepped in that day. He wasn't just saving them. He was saving himself from living that loss all over again. For the first time, the rancher turned to face her fully. "No one should lose their child," he said firmly. And in that moment, she realized his silence wasn't emptiness, it was filled with memories too heavy for words. The days turned into weeks, and the ranch began to feel like home. The widow's son laughed again, his small feet pounding across the fields as he played with the ranch dogs. The widow found herself smiling more too, her heart lighter with every sunrise. The rancher remained quiet, but his actions spoke louder than words. He repaired the roof of their cabin, made sure the boy had a pony to ride, and always left a share of his meals for them. His silent kindness became the foundation on which their fragile lives rebuilt. One evening, the widow stood beside him on the porch, watching the stars. She whispered, "I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this: you gave us more than life. You gave us a chance to start again." The rancher tilted his hat, a faint smile touching his lips. "Sometimes," he said softly, "second chances are the only thing worth fighting for." In that quiet moment, under the vast western sky, a bond stronger than words began to form. Not born out of obligation, but out of healing. The widow had begged not to lose her child. Instead, she had found not just safety, but a protector, a partner, and the beginning of something neither of them thought they'd ever have again: family.